Street photography. Street photography is a genre of photography that captures everyday life on the street. It's probably the most well-known type of photography and is common on social media websites like Instagram and Flickr. I've assembled a list of tips and tricks that have helped me to take some great photos and hopefully could help you too. Tip number 1, have a clear subject. In all photos, you will notice that they have a clear subject. Commonly, street photographers use things such as signs, people, food, architecture, and commuters. A great way to see if your image has a clear subject is to look at your image and see if your eye bounces around the image or focuses on a certain point. Focusing on a model or person is a lot easier, as your eyes will naturally be attracted to people in the image. Aperture is an extremely important part of making the subject clear, as it makes the background blurrier, but I will touch on this later on. Tip number 2, use leading lines. Leading lines are an important part of allowing your viewer to look at the subject. They are lines leading into the subject of your image. All photos that look pleasing to the eye have leading lines, and photos that look messy or overcrowded do not use leading lines properly. You can get away with not using leading lines if you're shooting at a model or a subject with a very blurry background, but in street photography, leading lines are extremely important to creating a good looking image. Tip number 3, use aperture priority mode on your camera. Aperture is how wide the hole in the lens is on your camera, which controls how blurry the background is. The lower the aperture, the blurrier the background. In street photography, it's preferable to have your aperture as low as possible to give a nice blurry background, as this gives your eyes a clear subject point to look at. Aperture priority mode on your camera allows your camera to automatically control your ISO and shutter speed. This is extremely useful in street photography, as during fast-paced scenarios, you don't really want to be sitting there fiddling with your camera settings, because by the time you're done setting the perfect exposure, the opportunity to take the shot is already gone. Tip number 4, use reflections. Reflections in your photos will make them look a whole lot better, especially at nighttime when there's lots of artificial light. The easiest reflective surface to look for is wet ground. So after a rainstorm, it is great to go and shoot photographs because the ground is nice and wet and will give you nice glossy reflections with lots of lights in them. You can get a water bottle and artificially pour the water on the ground, which gives you the same effect, and you don't have to have it rain beforehand. Glass is also a great reflector and super common, but it's harder to use in images as it's harder to get your subject in a pane of glass, so it's really good for model shots, but it's a lot harder for just regular street photography. Tip number 5, be discreet and quick. People aren't super fond of having their photos taken, so you need to move quickly and quietly. Headphones are also super helpful, as it blocks out external noise and people yelling at you or ticking you off, so they're especially useful to block out that noise, because if you ignore people, they generally won't bother trying to pursue you and take action. Security also isn't too keen of you taking photos in a public place, so if you're in and out of a location within 5 or so minutes, the likelihood of you getting kicked out or having something happen to you is extremely low. Having a small camera is also extremely useful, as it allows you to keep a low profile and will draw less attention. So this can be done by using a prime lens instead of a zoom lens, and also avoiding bulky accessories for your camera like a microphone or a flash will also help. Tip number 6, shoot RAW. RAW is a type of file format which allows the camera to store a lot of information in a file about lighting and color, which allows you to then use it properly in editing later on. The disadvantage of RAW is that it takes up a large amount of space. So a JPEG will typically take about 2 to 3 megabytes, whereas a RAW shot will take about 40, so make sure to format your SD card before going shooting. Tip number 7, utilize editing properly. Editing your photos properly is the most important part of street photography. Lots of photos I've taken have looked awful in camera, and then when I've gotten home and edited them and changed the colors, they look a whole lot better. If you're not editing your photos, you're not getting the full potential out of them. The most important edit to do is cropping and straightening your image. Other editing tools for more advanced users would be changing colors, fixing exposure, adding presets, even adding things to the image. So I've added things like haze and stars to an image to make it look more pleasing. Even though some street photography purists will say, don't add things to your image, it is still very important to crop and straighten your images. Tip number 8, equipment is not as important as you would think. Fancy cameras do not make or break your photo. The iPhone in your pocket probably has a great camera that could get you some great shots. Using the excuse of having a bad camera to not take photos is a lame one. Here's some examples of some great photos taken with old DSLRs. So that DSLR in your closet from 20 years ago can still take great images if you learn how to use it properly. Modern and expensive cameras can make photography a lot easier, as they are great all-rounders and adapt quickly to the situation you're in. If you play to the strengths of your older cameras, however, you will still get some great photos. Don't take a 20-year-old Nikon out at night with barely any light, and crank the ISO as you'll get grainy, awful looking shots. However, if you take a Nikon out at night with a lot of artificial light in the image, or take it out at day where there's lots of natural light, and play to the camera's strength, you'll still get some very nice looking shots. So just keeping in mind that if you don't have a fancy camera, you have to utilize its strengths. Tip number 9, just go and do it. Your first photo is not going to be good, your first video is not going to be good, and your first podcast is not going to be good. The most important part of any craft is to just go out and do it. If you spend 10 hours at home studying techniques or just binge watching Peter McKinnon videos, you're actually not going to get better at your craft. The most important thing to do is just go out and do it. Don't be scared to take photos too. I'll typically go on a night and take maybe 300 photos, and if I'm lucky, I'll get 12 good ones. Perfectionism is the enemy of progress. Thanks for watching. Good luck out there.